They say a single moment can change everything. A heartbeat. A choice. A word spoken or withheld. But what if that moment, what if that one decision you made to protect yourself, became the very thing that exposed who you truly are? This is the story of a woman who lied to save herself, and discovered that the truth was the only thing that could set her free. Hello, beautiful souls. Before we begin this journey together, I have a small favor to ask. If stories that touch your heart, that make you think about your own choices, your own courage, if these matter to you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. It's quick, it's free, and it's the most powerful way you can support us in bringing you more stories that matter. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love knowing that we're connected across continents, all seeking the same thing, stories that remind us what it means to be human. Thank you. Now, let's return to our main character, a woman whose name you don't need to know yet, because her story could be anyone's. It could be yours. It could be mine. The hallway was quiet in that particular way office buildings get just before the world wakes up. You know that time, when the lights hum with a soft, almost apologetic buzz, when the air smells faintly of fresh coffee mixed with printer ink and possibility. When everything feels suspended between night's honesty and day's performance. She walked fast. Not running, running would draw attention. But fast enough that her heels clicked a rhythm of urgency against the polished floor. Her head tilted slightly down, the universal posture of someone who doesn't want to be seen, doesn't want to be stopped, doesn't want to be known. One hand gripped her bag like it held secrets. The other clutched her phone, its screen glowing with unread messages stacked like unpaid bills, each one a small demand she wasn't ready to answer. In her chest, her heart beat with that specific morning anxiety, the kind that says, make it to your desk. Make it through this day. Stay invisible. Stay safe. Then it happened. Something slipped from her bag and hit the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the morning silence. Not a crash. Not a clatter. Just a light, unmistakable thud that made her freeze mid-step. Her body went rigid. Time did that strange thing it does in moments of panic, it stretched and compressed simultaneously, making a single second feel like an hour while also moving too fast to catch. Before she could turn back, before she could bend down and reclaim what was hers, a man's voice broke the silence. I've got it. She watched as he bent down, this tall man she didn't recognize, dressed simply in a way that somehow made him stand out more than expensive suits ever could. No rush in his movements. No noise. Just presence. The kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but commands it anyway. He picked up the item carefully, held it between his fingers, looked at it once with an expression she couldn't read. Then he lifted his eyes and met hers. Who does this belong to? The question was gentle. Neutral. Almost careless. The kind of question someone asks when they're simply trying to return something, nothing more, nothing hidden. But her heart slammed so hard she felt it in her throat, in her fingertips, behind her eyes. For a second, no, for an eternity compressed into a second, the hallway seemed too bright. Too quiet. Too exposed. Every fluorescent light felt like a spotlight. Every window felt like a witness. Every possible answer rushed through her mind at once, a cascade of consequences playing out in parallel universes. If she told the truth, it would raise questions. If she raised questions, people would look closer. And if people looked closer, everything she had worked so hard to keep hidden, the version of herself she'd outgrown, the struggles she'd survived, the past she'd buried beneath professionalism and perfect attendance, could fall apart. She swallowed. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "That's not mine," she said. The words came out smoothly. Too smoothly. Like they'd been rehearsed for years, waiting for exactly this moment. Like lies always do when fear is the scriptwriter. The man nodded once. Just once. As if accepting the answer without judgment, without question, without suspicion. He turned to the receptionist nearby, a woman just arriving for her shift, and handed the item to her with a quiet, lost and found, please. No lecture. No suspicion. No knowing look. Just a brief pause, a nod that might have been acknowledgement or might have been dismissal, and then he walked away down the corridor, his footsteps fading into the building's morning sounds. She stood there, breath shallow, watching his back disappear around the corner. She didn't know it yet, but the man who had picked up that small, personal item, worn and meaningful in ways only she understood, was the chief executive officer of the company. And the lie she had just told was the first test. Minutes later, she was at her desk, trying desperately to focus on the screen in front of her. But focus is impossible when your mind is elsewhere, replaying, analyzing, justifying. Numbers blurred together like watercolors in rain. Emails chimed and stacked, each notification another small demand she couldn't quite process. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but her mind was in that hallway, watching that moment again and again like a film stuck on repeat. The sound of the item hitting the floor. The calm tone of his voice. The ease with which she had denied the truth. She hadn't lied because she was careless. She hadn't lied because she was cruel or dishonest by nature. She had lied because she was afraid. Afraid of being seen as less than. Afraid of being judged for where she came from, for the life she'd lived before this job, before this version of herself. Afraid that one honest sentence, "Yes, that's mine," could undo years of effort, countless late nights, and quiet sacrifices no one ever noticed or celebrated. Around her, co-workers laughed and chatted about weekend plans. Someone complained about traffic on the interstate. Someone else mentioned a delayed flight to visit family. Normal conversations. Normal lives. Normal people who'd never had to fight to belong. She straightened her posture and forced herself to breathe. It was over, she told herself. A small moment. A harmless lie. Nothing more. Down the hall, behind a closed office door, the man who had picked up the item placed his briefcase on the polished table and paused. He remembered her face with perfect clarity. The way her shoulders had tensed the moment the item fell. The half-second of fear that flashed across her eyes before she answered. The smoothness of the lie that suggested this wasn't her first time choosing safety over truth. He hadn't asked the question to accuse anyone. He hadn't set a trap. He had simply asked because he wanted to listen, because he had learned long ago that truth reveals itself not in what people say when they're prepared, but in how they respond when they're surprised. And from that single answer, from those 3 small words, "That's not mine," he had learned far more about her than any resume could tell him. Because in a company filled with resumes, titles, and polished smiles, character was revealed in moments like these. Quiet moments. Ordinary moments. Moments when no one thought they were being tested. He had learned what she was afraid of. And now he was curious to see what she would do with that fear. She tried to tell herself that nothing had changed. That it was just another morning at work, another ordinary day in a building full of people who barely noticed her existence. She opened her email, adjusted her chair for the 3rd time, and focused on the screen in front of her with an intensity that was almost violent. But her body told a different story. Her shoulders stayed tight, hunched forward like she was bracing for impact. Her jaw clenched without her realizing it, creating a dull ache that would follow her through the day. Every sound in the office felt sharper than usual, phones ringing seemed louder, conversation seemed more pointed, even the hum of the air conditioning felt like it was drilling into her skull. She kept seeing the item in her mind. Not just the item itself, but what it represented. She had carried it with her for years, not because it was valuable in any monetary sense, but because it reminded her of who she had been before life taught her to stay quiet. Before she learned that survival sometimes meant hiding. She had promised herself that this job would be different. That she would keep her head down, do excellent work, and never give anyone a reason to look too closely. No one here needed to know how close she had come to losing everything. No one needed to know how many doors had closed before this one finally, miraculously opened. At lunch, she ate alone at her desk. She usually did. It was easier that way, less explaining, less pretending, less energy spent maintaining the careful persona she'd constructed. Across the office, a group of co-workers laughed about a meeting that had gone long, their voices carrying that particular lightness of people who'd never had to worry about belonging. Someone mentioned the chief executive officer by name, joking about how calm he always seemed, even when everyone else was panicking. "It's like nothing rattles him," someone said. "He just observes everything." Her stomach tightened painfully. She hadn't known who he was in the hallway. She had seen him before, of course, everyone had, from a distance, in meetings, in company-wide presentations. But out of context, without the conference room or the title or the attention of others, he had just been another man passing through. And that was what scared her most. He hadn't looked powerful in that moment. He had looked observant. And observation, she was beginning to understand, was far more dangerous than authority. Later that afternoon, an email went out to the entire department. Subject line, volunteers needed, internal review project. It was nothing glamorous. Extra hours, extra responsibility, the kind of thankless work that required diving into spreadsheets and processes while everyone else went home on time. The kind of project people avoided like a meeting that could have been an email. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Drawing attention to herself had never ended well. Every time she'd stepped forward in the past, every time she'd raised her hand or volunteered or tried to be seen, something had gone wrong. Not dramatically, never dramatically. Just small failures, quiet rejections, the slow erosion of hope. But then she remembered the lie. Not the words themselves, but how easy they had been to say. How fear had decided for her before she'd even had time to think. How automatic the self-protection had become. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. If she stayed invisible, she would stay safe. But she would also stay exactly where she was, forever apologizing to herself for what she didn't dare to become. Forever wondering what might have been possible if she'd just been brave enough to be seen. She took a breath that felt like jumping off a cliff. She signed up. The next day, she was called into a small conference room with a handful of others. The air felt heavier there, more serious. Papers were neatly stacked on the table. A projector hummed softly, waiting. When the door opened and he walked in, the room went quiet without anyone asking it to. It was that kind of presence, not domineering, not aggressive, just utterly assured. Like gravity. The chief executive officer greeted everyone politely, professionally, then took a seat at the head of the table. His eyes moved from face to face, calm and unreadable. When they landed on her, they paused just long enough for her to notice. Not recognition. Not accusation. Recognition of something else. Something she couldn't name. The meeting began. He asked simple questions, clear, direct questions that required honesty more than confidence, substance more than polish. One by one, people answered carefully, diplomatically, saying what they thought he wanted to hear, offering solutions wrapped in corporate language that meant nothing. When it was her turn, her voice almost failed her. Her throat felt dry. Her hands trembled in her lap where no one could see them. She could feel every eye in the room on her. She could lie again. She could smooth over the uncomfortable truth with comfortable vagueness. No one would know. No one would call her out. Instead, she spoke plainly. She admitted what she didn't understand. She explained what she had observed, not opinions dressed as facts, but actual observations. She took responsibility for a small mistake in the data that no one else had even mentioned, a tiny discrepancy that everyone else had glossed over. The room stayed silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Not judgmental silence. Just, listening silence. Then he nodded. "Thank you," he said, and his voice carried a weight that simple words shouldn't carry. "That's exactly the kind of answer we need." Something shifted inside her. Just slightly. Just enough to notice. Like a door that had been locked for years suddenly creaking open the tiniest bit, letting in a sliver of light. After the meeting, as people filed out in small clusters of whispered conversations, she gathered her papers slowly, desperately hoping to leave unnoticed. She almost made it to the door. Almost. "Please stay for a moment." His voice stopped her mid-step. Her heart raced, but she turned back, forcing her expression to remain neutral even though panic was flooding every nerve. He waited until the room was empty, until the door clicked shut with a finality that made her acutely aware of how alone they were. Then he spoke, not as a superior evaluating an employee, but as someone genuinely curious about a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Fear makes good people hide," he said calmly, thoughtfully. "But it also reveals who they really are." He didn't mention the hallway. He didn't mention the item. Not yet. But they both knew. The knowledge hung in the air between them like morning mist, invisible but impossible to ignore. She nodded, unsure what to say, unsure if anything she said would matter or only make things worse. "Your honesty in that meeting," he continued, "was more valuable than perfect answers would have been. Do you know why?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Because it showed me you're learning. And learning requires admitting what you don't know." As she left the room, her hands were shaking. But for the first time since that morning in the hallway, the fear felt different. Less like a threat pressing down on her chest. More like a warning that the truth was catching up. And when it did, she had no idea whether it would save her or cost her everything. The days that followed moved forward with a strange momentum, like water flowing downhill, inevitable, gathering force. She noticed the change in small ways at first, subtle shifts that might have been coincidence but felt like something more. People listened more carefully when she spoke. Not with the polite attention they gave everyone, but with genuine interest. Her emails were answered faster than before. Her name began appearing on meeting invites for discussions she would never have been included in just weeks ago. None of it felt accidental. It felt like a test continuing, like that moment in the hallway had set something in motion that was still unfolding. She worked harder than ever, arriving when the building was still dark, staying until the cleaning crew arrived. Not because she wanted recognition, but because she couldn't afford another mistake. The lie in the hallway still lived in her chest, quiet but heavy, like a stone waiting for the wrong moment to become visible. One evening, long after most of the office had emptied and the city lights began glowing against the darkening sky, she found herself alone in the break room. The vending machines hummed their mechanical lullaby. Her coffee had gone cold in its paper cup. She leaned against the counter and finally allowed herself to breathe without performance. That was when she heard footsteps. She turned, expecting a security guard or another late-working analyst burning the midnight oil. Instead, it was him. The chief executive officer stood in the doorway, jacket draped over his arm, sleeves rolled slightly at the wrists in a way that made him look less like a corporate leader and more like someone who'd simply stayed late to finish important work. Without the formality of meetings or the attention of others, he looked almost ordinary again. Almost human. "Working late," he said. Not a question. An observation. "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wanted to finish reviewing the numbers from this morning's session." He nodded, moving further into the room with that same unhurried presence. "That project matters. You handled it well." The compliment caught her completely off guard. Praise from him was rare, she'd observed that in meetings. Praise directed specifically at her felt surreal, like she'd stumbled into someone else's life. "Thank you," she said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Not rushed. Just space, the kind of silence that invites truth instead of demanding it. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the counter between them. Her breath stopped. It was the item from the hallway. Clean, undamaged, exactly as it had been before it fell. The small, worn object that meant nothing to anyone else but everything to her. "I believe this belongs to you," he said calmly, his voice carrying no judgment, no triumph, just simple truth. For a moment, the room felt too small, the air too thin. She stared at it, her mind racing through implications and consequences. He knew. Of course he knew. He had always known. The lie had never fooled him for even a second. It had only delayed this moment. "I'm sorry," she said finally. Her voice was steady, even though her hands weren't. Even though her heart was hammering against her ribs like it wanted to escape. "I shouldn't have lied." "I know," he replied simply. She waited for consequences. For disappointment. For the professional distance that comes before termination. Instead, he leaned back slightly against the counter and crossed his arms in a gesture that was more thoughtful than defensive. "Do you know why I didn't call you out that morning?" he asked. She shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "Because honesty given under pressure is more valuable than honesty given safely," he said, his words measured and deliberate. "I wanted to see who you were when it mattered. Not in that hallway, but in every moment after." She swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "And what did you see?" He looked at her carefully, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression that looked almost like respect. "Someone who was afraid," he said. But also someone who corrected herself the moment she was given the chance. Someone who chose truth when it would have been easier to keep hiding. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "Not here. Not now. I was afraid of losing this job," she admitted, the words coming out raw and honest. "It means everything to me." "I know," he said gently. "That's why you're still here." He slid the item back toward her across the counter. She picked it up slowly, as if it might disappear, as if this moment might shatter if she moved too quickly. "There will be another review soon," he continued, his tone shifting back to professional. "A public one. People will be watching more closely. I won't protect you from that." She nodded, understanding the warning. "I understand. But," he added, and there was something almost kind in his voice, "I will judge you by your actions, not your past." He left the room a moment later, his footsteps fading down the hallway into the building's evening silence. She stood there long after he was gone, holding the item in her hands, feeling its familiar weight. The lie was no longer hers to carry. But the test was far from over. Because next time, the truth wouldn't be asked for quietly in an empty hallway or a break room after hours. Next time, it would be demanded in front of everyone. The review happened on a Thursday. The kind of Thursday that felt heavier than others, where the air in the office seemed to press down on everyone at once. Emails slowed to a trickle. Conversations softened to whispers. People sat straighter in their chairs, hyper-aware that attention was about to land somewhere, and each person silently praying it wouldn't be on them. She arrived early, as she always did now. The conference room lights were already blazing. A long table filled the space, its surface polished and unforgiving, reflecting the faces of those who would sit around it. At the front of the room, a screen waited, blank for the moment but soon to display numbers that would speak louder than any excuses ever could. She took a seat near the middle, close enough to be seen, not close enough to feel completely exposed. At least, that's what she told herself. The item was in her bag. She had almost left it at home that morning, almost convinced herself that carrying it again was unnecessary, even dangerous. But something inside her refused to put it away. It was a reminder now, not of fear, but of a choice she had already made once. A choice she would need to make again. The room filled slowly with executives, managers, analysts, people whose opinions shaped careers without them ever fully realizing the power they held. When he entered, the ambient noise faded immediately, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. The chief executive officer took his place at the head of the table. His expression was calm as always, not cold, not warm, just present. He didn't need to raise his voice or demand attention. Attention came to him naturally, like water flowing downhill. "We're here to review discrepancies found during our internal audit," he said evenly, his voice carrying perfectly in the quiet room. "Not to assign blame, but to understand decisions." The word sounded fair. Reasonable. But everyone in that room knew better than to underestimate a moment like this. Careers had ended in meetings that started with similar promises. The presentation began. Slides changed with mechanical precision. Numbers appeared, cold, objective, damning in their clarity. Questions were asked. Most were answered carefully, with language designed to protect more than explain, with corporate speak that said everything and nothing simultaneously. Then her name appeared on the screen. A small data inconsistency. Minor on paper. The kind of thing that could be blamed on a system delay or shared responsibility or any of a dozen convenient explanations. The kind of thing people explained away every single day in offices around the world. The room went quiet. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, that old instinct rising like floodwater: stay small. Let it pass. Say as little as possible. But then she remembered standing in that hallway, watching him walk away. She remembered the break room, the item on the counter, his words about honesty under pressure. She raised her hand. "I want to address that," she said, her voice carrying more clearly than she expected. All eyes turned toward her. The weight of their attention felt physical, like gravity had suddenly increased in her corner of the room. She stood, legs steady even though her pulse absolutely was not. "The discrepancy was my responsibility," she said clearly. "I noticed it late in the process, and I chose to correct it without escalating it through proper channels. That was a mistake." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not how these moments usually went. People didn't volunteer accountability. They deflected it, distributed it, buried it in process failures and systemic issues. She continued, her voice gaining strength from honesty rather than losing it. "The data itself didn't cause harm to any project outcomes, but the decision to handle it quietly could have set a dangerous precedent. I should have reported it immediately, regardless of how minor it seemed." Silence followed. Thick, expectant, the kind of silence that could go either way, toward judgment or toward respect. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She could feel his presence, his attention, his assessment. When he spoke, his voice didn't rise. He didn't need volume to make impact. "Thank you for your honesty," he said, and there was something in his tone that made people sit up straighter. That choice, to own a mistake publicly, matters more than the error itself. He turned to address the entire room. "This is what accountability looks like. Not perfection. Responsibility. Not hiding mistakes. Learning from them." The meeting moved on, but something had already fundamentally shifted. She felt it in the room's atmosphere, in the way people's expressions changed, in the subtle nods she caught from the corner of her eye. Afterward, as people gathered their things and filtered out in small groups speaking in low voices, she remained seated for a moment. She needed to let the weight lift slowly from her shoulders, needed to process what had just happened. She hadn't known what the outcome would be when she raised her hand. She had only known that she couldn't lie again. Couldn't hide again. Couldn't be that version of herself who chose safety over truth. He approached her as the room emptied, his footsteps deliberate but not hurried. "You did what many would not," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "What most cannot." She nodded, finding her voice. "I learned the cost of hiding." His gaze flicked briefly to her bag, where she knew he understood the item rested. Some lessons leave marks, he said. Yes, she replied, meeting his eyes for the first time with something approaching confidence. But they also leave direction. He paused, then allowed himself a faint smile. You're being considered for a larger role. Nothing final yet, but what happened today mattered greatly. Her breath caught. Not from surprise, exactly, but from the sudden weight of possibility, the realization that truth hadn't destroyed her. It had positioned her. Thank you, she said, and the words carried more meaning than 2 syllables should be able to hold. As he walked away, she finally allowed herself to sit back in her chair. The truth had not punished her. It had freed her. And for the first time, she understood that the real test had never been about the item or the lie or even the job. It had been about who she chose to be when the cost was real. When hiding would have been easier. When truth demanded everything. And that choice was now visible to everyone, not as weakness, but as strength. The hallway looks different now, though nothing about it has physically changed. The same lights hum softly. The same floors gleam under morning sun. The same rhythm of footsteps echoes through familiar corridors. But she walks differently. Head up. Steps confident. Not because she's become someone else, but because she's finally become fully herself. The item sits on her desk now, not hidden in her bag, but displayed openly. A reminder not of shame, but of the moment everything changed. The moment she chose truth over safety. Authenticity over acceptance. Her real self over her protected self. The promotion came through. The role that was created specifically for someone who understood pressure from both sides, someone who knew what it felt like to have very little and still choose integrity. People still watch her, but now it's with respect rather than suspicion. They seek her opinion because they know she'll tell them truth, even uncomfortable truth. Especially uncomfortable truth. And sometimes, late in the evening when the building grows quiet again, she sees him in the hallway. They exchange nods, a mutual acknowledgement of the test that was never really a test, but an opportunity to discover who you are when no one's forcing you to be anything. Because that's the thing about truth. It doesn't just reveal who you are to others. Music swells gently, emotionally. So, dear friends, this is where our story ends tonight. But perhaps it's also where yours begins. Because each of us carries our own small items, the parts of ourselves we're afraid to show, the truths we're scared to speak, the past we think we need to hide in order to have a future. And each of us faces moments when we must choose, do we hide to stay safe? Or do we show up, fully ourselves, knowing that authenticity is the only real security we'll ever have? If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own moments of truth, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories that matter. Stories that remind us what it means to be courageously, beautifully, imperfectly human. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment like this? A choice between hiding and being seen? I read every single comment, and your stories inspire me more than you know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's hiding. Someone who's afraid. Someone who needs to know that truth, while terrifying, is also the path to freedom. Until next time, may you find the courage to choose truth. May you discover that being seen for who you really are is not a risk, it's the greatest gift you can give yourself. Take care of your hearts, beautiful souls. I'll see you in the next story. Music fades. The life lesson. The truth doesn't always set you free immediately. Sometimes it tests you first. But the prison of pretending is always worse than the risk of being real. Key lessons from this story. 1. Fear protects, but truth transforms. Fear kept her safe in the moment, but it couldn't give her what she truly wanted: respect, growth, and authentic belonging. Only truth could do that. 2. Who you are under pressure reveals everything. The CEO wasn't testing her competence, he was observing her character. And character is revealed not in comfort, but in crisis. Not in prepared moments, but in surprised ones. 3. Honesty under pressure is more valuable than honesty given safely. Anyone can tell the truth when there's no cost. The real measure of integrity is choosing truth when lying would save you. That's when honesty becomes courage. 4. Accountability is not weakness, it's leadership. When she stood up in that meeting and owned her mistake publicly, she didn't diminish herself. She revealed the kind of person others want to follow, someone who takes responsibility rather than deflecting it. 5. The past you hide becomes the prison you live in. She spent so much energy hiding where she came from, afraid it would disqualify her. But it was only when she stopped hiding that she became qualified, not despite her past, but because of what she'd learned from it. 6. Trust is earned in moments when no one's watching. The CEO tested her not in formal evaluations, but in an empty hallway. Real character emerges in unguarded moments, when there's no audience and no script. That's where trust is truly built or broken. 7. The cost of truth is real, but the cost of lies is higher. Yes, telling the truth can be scary. It can have consequences. But living with lies, carrying that weight, maintaining that performance, always afraid of being discovered, that cost compounds daily until it becomes unbearable. Sparkles, sparkles, sparkles. Your truth might be scary. But your authentic self is the only version of you that can truly succeed. A final thought. This story reminds us that we are all carrying something. Some small piece of our past or present that we're afraid to show. Some truth we think might disqualify us from belonging. But what if the very thing we're hiding is actually the key to our freedom? What if being fully seen, flaws, mistakes, struggles and all, is not the end of our story, but the beginning of the one that actually matters? The woman in this story learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is choosing truth even when fear is screaming at you to hide. May we all find that courage when we need it most.